Hi, I'm Linda Mowell, and welcome to Art This Week. On this week's episode, we visit the Amon Carter Museum of American Art, and our interviewer, Rachel Livedalen, speaks with artist Dornith Doherty about her exhibition, Dornith Doherty, Archiving Eden. Now for Art This Week. Hi, I'm Rachel Livedalen here with Dornith Doherty at the Amon Carter Museum to talk about her exhibition, Archiving Eden. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, thanks, Rachel.
So this exhibition consists of almost a decade worth of work concerning seed banks. And how did you first become interested in seed banks?
Well, before I started this project, I did not know what a seed bank was. I had never heard of one. And I read a very interesting article by John Seabrook in the New Yorker magazine called Sowing for the Apocalypse. And that came out in 2008, and it was about the opening of the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. And I was totally fascinated by the kind of simultaneously apocalyptic view that was embedded in building a seed vault on the North Pole, but also the hope that it symbolized by having people with a plan that were trying to save as much biodiversity as possible.
Now, when you visited the seed bank in the North Pole, I imagine that you must have felt like an explorer, a pioneer. What was that like? What was that first visit like?
Oh, that was so amazing because I'm primarily a landscape photographer in Texas. Mm-hmm. And so every aspect of my gear is aimed at dissipating heat and protecting me from the sun. So, I had to research, the boots, the batteries, just everything. And it did tie in with that expeditionary history that photography has, where when we want to know about a remote or inaccessible place, we'll send a photographer. If you think about it, the photographs of the moon or the early 19th century photographs of the United States by photographers such as Timothy O'Sullivan, they were bringing back images of these inaccessible places and making them known to the people visually. Mm-hmm. So I really did have that sense of being part of that tradition.
Thinking about seed banks as functioning as a global agricultural backup system, mm-hmm. How does photography also work as a way of preserving something, documenting something? How do you see that role of photography functioning with this project?
Well, this is a dual project. And so part of it is tied in with that of documenting and preserving. I'm literally going to these remote places on the planet in Brazil and Australia and Russia, North Pole, and standing there with a camera and capturing light rays onto a device that creates an image because I'm standing there and the light rays are hitting my capturing device. So there is that authenticity or document that may come from that. But of course, they are still very much influenced by what I think is important to capture and how my subjective voice is completely infuses all of the work. The second half of the project is much less literal and not as descriptive in that way, where they're digital collages made from the x-rays.
Thinking about the subject matter in a lot of the photographs, I see landscapes, I see the collection of seeds. Mm-hmm. Sometimes there's glimpses of the human interaction with this collection. I love the images that feature the offices and the way that we've kind of structured these very organic things. So when you're visiting these places, whether you're in the North Pole or Brazil, how do you select what to photograph? What catches your eye when you're visiting these places?
Well, I, like you, am very interested in the kind of individual presence. There are no there are not many photographs that involve people in the project. It's more the remnants or traces of them. And one of the things that I think is interesting for me also is the kind of cultural aspects, so that you'll go through, and even though the labs share a scientific sensibility, no matter where they are, so they're orderly, they have these influences of how they do particular things. You know, they basically are, the subject matter of the documentary are the spaces and technology involved in trying to create a state of suspended animation in the materials. But there's also these the Brazilian labs are different from the Russian labs, and it's through their use of color or small decorative items that they'll put on their spaces that I find super, super interesting.
When you're working with the scientists, the researchers, or conservators of these seeds, have there been any collaborations or conversations that have led you down a different path with this project?
Well, yes. The conversation, I've worked in collaboration with a couple of the scientists over an extended period of time, most notably Dr. Dave Ellis, who is now at the Center for Potato Preservation in Peru. But he originally was at the United States Seed Bank, which is located in Fort Collins, Colorado. And I started the project with just wanting to photograph the spaces and technology. And he really profoundly affected the course of the project by giving me permission when I asked for it to use the X-ray machine to explore, peering into the insides of these materials. And so he said yes. When I asked to use the X-ray machine, he said yes. When I asked to use some of the research seeds or clones, the tissue samples, so that I could take them back to my studio in Texas and make the collages. So that really profoundly changed the direction. And the other way that the conversation with the scientists, I now know more about seed banking than I ever thought I would. And so sometimes when they're talking about their concerns or how they go about things, affects the kind of work I make when I go back to the studio. So I see the work as the materials, the plants or seeds, as being delicate, but also very resilient in that they can withstand being dried and frozen and lasting for 200 years or more. Mm-hmm. So that's really affected the way that those kind of conversations have affected.
Thinking about the works that involve the X-rayed seeds, like you said, you scan them on site and then you work with the images back in your studio and digitally collage them. How does the arrangement of the X-ray scans alter the image? I think especially of the images that involve almost a patterning of these seeds. How do you select the digital arrangement?
It's like drawing. And so that's a hard question, Rachel, because it's the artistic process. But the closest I can say it's like drawing or other collage process, where it's a combination of intuition and experimentation, but also having things in the back of your mind that you're thinking about as you're working that kind of come through the work.
When you're creating the collages, is it a way to show the fragility of the seeds, the way that the X-ray portrays this organic material?
Well, in some cases, it's not a single note, so it's not necessarily just about the fragility of the seeds. Sometimes they do, they strike me as very fragile. But if you when you see the show at the Amon Carter, for instance, there's a piece called Banksias, and that's kind of this robust, the frame is filled with, it feels like it's exploding. And that's more about the kind of reproductive vigor as opposed to the kind of delicate, more somber ones of, say, there's a lenticular in the show that's called 1400 ash tree seeds, and it's about 8 foot tall. And it's literally 1400 ash tree seeds, which are predicted, they're under attack by an imported pest in the United States, and so there's a huge species crash. And that particular piece, as you walk through it, you do feel the kind of fading away delicacy of these seeds. And the piece itself, since it's lenticular, has a color change. And when you walk from one side to the other, it changes from green to brown. So talking about the drying of the seeds, but also the other metaphors embedded in that.
Speaking of the lenticular print, I love how you have different photographic technologies at play within the work. And I think about the science of photography, whether it's the printing process or you're using a large format camera in some of the works. So there's a science in the actual process of making the work, but you're also playing with the idea of science and technology in general. Have you always been interested in science and art, science and photography?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, that's been a long time interest of mine. But I started this project more through the lens of stewardship and notions of stewardship. I was looking at how we create nature preserve or national parks as a way of drawing a line around a piece of land and preserving it for the future, much like a macro garden. So they're kind of curated in terms of what the plants are and if they have wildflowers or not. And so that notion of stewardship, of shepherding something forward to the future, was what struck me with the seed bank, is that the same thing, that we're taking this natural material, which is all of the plant life on Earth, and trying to make it available in the future in the face of biodiversity and land and environment loss.
Thinking about our current environmental climate, thinking about how science and climate change are being questioned or under attack right now, is this work more significant now than when you began, or has the current conversation about climate change taken you in a different direction?
Oh, well, none of the scientists think that this questioning of climate change is real. And I kind of have this opinion of, oh, pish posh, of course it's changing, and of course we have to do something about it. So I think it's just a temporary political, self-serving moment that will be followed by another moment where people will be aware. But I do think it's interesting to have that as the background for the work of because I'm not experiencing it that way, because I'm speaking to the scientists who are working very, very hard trying to do climate models and thinking about how much of our agricultural land may become drier, so they're trying to research for biodiversity that could address making corn dry, grow in a super dry climate, for instance. So that for me is just background noise.
Now I want to go back to the kind of techie photography aspect of using this large format field camera. And I imagine that you're using very long exposure times for some of the images.
Yes.
Does the idea of the time involved with taking the photograph impact the photograph itself? Is there a stronger sense of contemplation because of that time that it takes?
Well, I hope so. And the reason that many of them take a long time is because I'm making them the most descriptive possible. So the time is required to get everything completely in focus. So sometimes in Svalbard, for instance, the exposure was almost 15 minutes. So So yes, but now many of the later works, after I received the Guggenheim in 2012, I did research and started using a digital camera and a rig that is like using a view camera. I still have to use it on a tripod. It's super long, but I make a series of 20 images at super high resolution that are then stitched together so they can be 15 feet tall at perfect resolution. So digital has now caught up with the view camera where it can be as sharp as the view camera and in fact surpass it when you're printing very large, which is why I do it. But that's another interesting, if we're talking technical part, the view camera, you have this one lens point of view, and with this other rig, I'm making 20 many times photographs that are separate, that are then stitched together. So they are also collaged in the way that the digital work is collaged. And that's a super painstaking process too, because the slight change in the point of view makes it difficult. But an interesting story was that when I first went to the Svalbard, I had this view camera that is basically 19th century technology. It's completely mechanical. There's nothing digital about it at all. And when I was going, because you just shoot one sheet of film, and that's it. You get a chance, and then that's it. Or maybe you take 2 sheets, but you're limited by how much, because you're carrying your film with you. And so if you have 20 sheets for a day, you have to really kind of carefully keep track of that. So my colleagues at the University of North Texas, Paho Mann and Brent Phelps, said, well, you can't go to the North Pole with just this 19th century piece of technology. You have to take a DSLR. So I took a little point and shoot and a DSLR in addition to the view camera. And while the view camera was taking these very long exposures, you can step away from the camera and photograph. And I was doing that, and in every case, after 8 hours in this sub-freezing temperatures, the DSLR would fail. It would just freeze. And nothing I could do, I was keeping the battery, there's all these techniques that photographers were like, well, she's doing it wrong. Well, no, it was just that it froze. And so I would have to go home and take a nap. It would not be ready until the next day. But the view camera, I walked outside and I was taking a picture that's in here, and the slope you cannot see is super icy. And there was a polar gust that knocked me off my feet, knocked the camera we just slid down the thing. And because it's 19th century technology, right, it's all mechanical, I picked it up, shook it off, walked back up there and took the picture, right? But with a digital camera, it's so much more delicate. So it's that's my technical story.
You're there photographing these seeds that are meant to survive forever, and you're using this old school technology.
But if you think about that vault itself, most of the other vaults they're so high tech, and this one is too. When you look at the book or the other one, you can see that it looks like a James Bond lair. It's up on a mountain. There's a long tunnel. It's all metal and concrete. So it's interesting that the vault itself, even though it's very high tech in some ways, the inside of Svalbard has this long tunnel that's metal, there's concrete block and little streams of ice, right? And you walk down these series of airlock to finally get to the vaults. And the vaults themselves have forced air, they're at a certain temperature and humidity. But it is also fail-safe in the way of those 19th century cameras, where if the electricity goes out, if everything fails, it's below the permafrost, and they can last at that temperature with no intervention at all for 200 years. So the lights can go dark, all the technology can fail, and the seeds will still be safe. So I think that kind of connection to the 19th century view camera and the kind of mechanical simplicity, elegant simplicity, actually works better in some cases.
It's interesting hearing you talk about kind of the ins and outs of the photographic process, and you also teach photography. You've been a photo professor for many years. Mm-hmm. How has your creative interests influenced the way that you teach photography?
Well, you have to be engaged with your practice to be able to teach. I really think that my students are not influenced through my subject matter, although of course they are aware of it, and it is a subject matter that many people are interested in now, which is environmental, right? But they're influenced through my model of my dedication and my hard work, right? And I bring that to the table of like being fully engaged and thinking about your creative practice all the time. And that's what I hope to bring to my students. It's just that passion for what I do as an artist.
Well, I think that's a perfect place to end our conversation today. Thank you so much.
Oh,
for
Rachel, it was a
chatting with
delight.
us.
It was fun. Thank you.
And congratulations on this exhibition.
Oh, thank you.
We want to thank Dornith for speaking with us. For more information on the exhibition, go to cartermuseum.org. That's it for Art This Week. Thanks for watching.
I still got your Polaroid.